30, but I'm introducing Lecia Brooks of the Southern Poverty Law Center. I personally am very excited to have her here. Lecia Brooks leads the Southern Poverty Law Center's outreach efforts on key initiatives and social justice issues. As outreach director, she frequently gives presentations around the country to promote tolerance and diversity. She also serves as director of the Civil Rights Memorial Center in Montgomery, Alabama, an interpretive center designed to provide visitors to the Civil Rights Memorial with a deeper understanding of the civil rights movement. She joined the Southern Poverty Law Center staff in 2004 as the director of Mix It Up at Lunch Day, a teaching tolerance program designed to help break down racial, cultural, and social barriers in school. Previously, she worked for 12 years in a number of capacities for the National Conference for Community and Justice in its Los Angeles office. She is a graduate of Loyola Marymount University. So put your hands together for Lecia Brooks.
Hey, thank you all for staying. And you may know I was supposed to speak on Friday, but I came from another country, Montgomery, Alabama, and it took me forever to get here. Seriously. And I apologize because Nick offered me, gave me an hour because I like this presentation to be an hour. Now it's only going to be 30 minutes, so I'm sorry. For those of you that don't know anything about the Southern Poverty Law Center, we're a nonprofit organization founded in 1971. So my presentation is not directly, well, the topic is not secular activism, but really I'm talking about social justice in its entirety. And I really welcome the opportunity to speak with you all about it because as the last speaker mentioned, I believe you're a growing movement. And I have a personal investment in you connecting to larger social justice issues, right? So that it doesn't just become just like another thing. This is why I always talk so long because I have to comment on everything. Just as the other speaker was talking about the rise in secularism and the kind of decline in religious affiliation, I read the Pew study too. But again, I live in Montgomery, Alabama, and I'm telling you, we don't participate in those surveys, obviously. Right now, as we speak, there's a group, a very hateful organization, Operation Save America, is on the second day of their 2-day prayer fast on the steps of the Capitol. And if you don't know, Roy Moore is our, Chief Justice of the U.S. Supreme Court, the biggest religious ideologue, in the country, I would say. So things look a little bit different from my vantage point, and what I want to share with you is what we're seeing at the Southern Poverty Law Center relative to kind of social justice issues in general. Last night I had an opportunity to hear Marcia speak, and I'm so glad I got to hear her speak. And she talked a bit about it may have passed you by because you're a lot younger than we are. That it's incumbent upon us old activists to kind of pass along a history of activism so that you can pick it up and keep going. And it's really important to me to always preface my talks with the civil rights movement because Southern Poverty Law Center grew out of the civil rights movement. So this is Montgomery, Alabama, and the Civil Rights Memorial designed by Maya Lin, the artist and architect who did the Vietnam Veterans Memorial. It honors all, 40 people who were killed during the movement, and more importantly, talks about the major, not more importantly, but also talks about the major movements, including Rosa Parks. And Mrs. Parks' courageous stand December 1st, 1955 in Montgomery, Alabama, and refusing to give up her seat on the bus really, in our minds, my mind, launched the modern American civil rights movement. So it's super important for us to remember it because it can continue to inspire us and remind us what people did before us to remind us what we can do today. And so it's sometimes more than kind of an intellectual discourse, but actually kind of action in the street that include a wide breadth of the community members that you represent. So we had Montgomery Bus Boycott in 1955. The image you saw before that was the Edmund Pettus Bridge in Selma, kind of bookending the movement in Montgomery with the boycott in 55, as I mentioned, and then the Voting Rights March in 1965. the Selma to Montgomery March. And it ends here on this is the last leg of the Selma to Montgomery Voting Rights March, going down Dexter, headed towards the Capitol. As you can see, the Capitol is at the center right there where I'm telling you these people are right now. But in 1965, it was this multicultural, multi-ethnic, multi-generational group of people who decided to stand up and demand an end to racial injustice as we knew it. Certainly that kind of continues today. I don't know if you all saw it, but it was a really big thing for us in the civil rights community, the celebration of the Selma to Montgomery March. President Obama and thousands of people came to Selma to mark that. I will remind you that if you're not aware of it or you're not as passionate about it as I am or I would like you to be, that the Voting Rights Act was under attack in the term before the Supreme Court session, whereas the Voting Rights Act was gutted. So people who made these tremendous sacrifices, who were killed, who were beaten, and then we celebrated the 50th anniversary in March. The Voting Rights Act is not even the same 50 years hence. So the Southern Poverty Law Center grows out of this. It was founded by two white men who were born and raised in Montgomery, Alabama, Morris Dees and Joe Levin. And I like to point out that they're white because it's important. They were born and raised during the Jim Crow era. You know, they're like in their 70s now. So they grew up in this tradition of white supremacy and changed, right? And in fact went on to found the center as a place that stood against the very things that they were raised to believe in. So they did this, they founded this organization really kind of to continue the achievements of the civil rights martyrs. So the first cases or early cases were against the state of Alabama because, like, as is true today with the marriage equality ruling out of the U.S. Supreme Court, Alabama just doesn't roll over just because, you know, the U.S. Supreme Court says so. So you have to sue them. So back then we started suing them over the Civil Rights Act, which banned racial discrimination in housing, in education, in employment. And so we're finding that we're doing some of those same kinds of things. There were, you know, you've heard the stories about recreational facilities that were closed, swimming pools that were closed, so that folks wouldn't have to live up to the Civil Rights Act and integrate. Again, very similar to what's going on in post the marriage equality ruling, and they're saying, well, we just won't marry, this is what they said in Alabama, we just won't marry people at all. The probate judge, we just stop that whole marriage thing in general, and they tried to do that. We're still kind of on their case, and ACLU and the Southern Poverty Law Center have a hotline, and any time that someone's denied a marriage license at a probate judge, from a probate judge in Alabama, we're ready to sue them. But it wasn't until the Southern Poverty Law Center represented this woman. Her name is Beulah Mae Donald. She was a mother who lived in Mobile, Alabama, and in 1981, her son, not an activist, was randomly attacked, kidnapped and beaten, and then lynched from a tree. This was in 1981 in Mobile, Alabama. And this kind of thing, it's a horrific image to be sure, but this kind of thing used to happen in this country all the time. And the fact that it happened in 1981 was, you know, justifiably awful. So Morris decided to sue the Klan. It had never been done before, so he came up with this legal strategy to sue the Klan in civil court. The two guys who committed the murder were eventually found guilty, but they only did it, they were younger guys, and they only did it because the Klan leader told them to do it. So we went after the Klan leader and the Klan organization, and were able to be successful, a $7 million judgment against the Klan, the United Klans of America, and shut them down. So that was, you know, seemed pretty successful legal strategy. And certainly that particular Klan group wasn't the only one in the country, so we started, you know, taking it on the road, as it were. In this case, this was in South Carolina. As you know, we've had some recent tragedy in South Carolina in in the aftermath of the massacre of the 9 black people at the Emmanuel Church, there have been a series of burnings or arsons at African American churches. And some in the media would tell you, or some in law enforcement would tell you that they're not arson, they're not hate crime, they're not this, they're not that. Interestingly enough, it was one of these churches that we represented in 1999, Macedonia Baptist Church. There's really old black churches in the South that have a tremendous history in connection to a time when black folks were enslaved. So they're very important to historical memory. In any case, we won the largest judgment of any civil suit against an extremist group in that case. Just a couple more. We've probably had about 15 or 20 major civil suits against hate and extremist groups, not all Klan groups, of course. In this instance, it was against a Aryan Nation group, and this was in Idaho, in Coeur d'Alene, Idaho. They had this huge compound, and they used to have conferences and concerts, and they had a quote-unquote church there, and folks would come there, young people would come there to be trained, in the ways of the white Aryan Nation. And our client was abducted and beaten. Fortunately, she didn't lose her life, but we were able to sue the Klan in this case and got their property. And so this is an image of her raising the building after she got the property in settlement of the judgment. It was a $6 million judgment. Now, our most recent case was against this guy, Ron Edwards, who was the leader of I forgot his Klan group, a Klan group in Kentucky, where our client in this case was a 16-year-old biracial boy who was at the fair, and these guys tagged him as an illegal immigrant and beat him within an inch of his life. So Imperial Klans of America. So we were able to sue Ron Edwards and his group, and it was a $2.5 million judgment. We're a nonprofit organization. We don't charge our clients to represent them, nor do we share in any of the award money. Now, as you can imagine, it takes a lot of resources and a lot of time to launch this litigation against hate groups. So we came up with another way to marginalize and get rid of, get rid of these hate groups. And the way we do it is through publishing a hate map. This is what you see now. You can find it on our website. Every year, we wipe the map clean and identify all of the active hate groups in the United States. So we're always looking a year back. This is for 2014, and there were 784 active hate groups in the United States. As you can see from the map, they're scattered all over. There are very, very few places to be safe in the United States, but you'll also notice a high concentration in the South, which no one is ever surprised by. But I want you to pay attention to the Northeast, where there's an extremely high concentration of hate groups in the Northeast, and there always has been. But people tend to forget that. And then there's a growing number of groups in the Pacific Northwest. But what we found, well, actually this group called American Communities took our data from our hate maps and started analyzing, kind of trying to figure out what are the commonalities, why are they popping up in some regions and not other regions. And you'll be interested to know that there are more hate groups in areas where there are lower income and greater diversity. So it goes to that Putnam book, which we talk about all the time. Where there's increased diversity, one might think that things are better, and in fact they're not. And if you have the deadly combination of low income, high diversity, then you have a high probability of having a hate group. There's also some commonality, or some pattern rather, where you find counties or areas that are called, that this group, American Communities, called Evangelical Hubs. They have a high concentration of hate groups. And they happen to be located, these evangelical hubs, of course, are primarily in the South, because they pair those with a high African-American population, which would be in the South. And I point that out to say, because you could have some evangelical hubs in the Midwest, but because the racial demographics are not as diverse as they are in the Deep South, you don't have your prevalence of hate groups. And when I talk about the Deep South and the high prevalence of hate groups there, in areas that have low income, high diversity. I'm talking about not just Alabama and Mississippi, Georgia, but Tennessee, Kentucky, Missouri, and Oklahoma, Arkansas, all of these areas. So it's a wide swath of the country that's still struggling with this phenomenon of hate groups. Now, we've been tracking and monitoring hate groups in the United States since the year 2000. And what we were able to show is that there's been kind of a steady increase. Good news is that the last couple of years, there's been a downward trend. 784 in 2014, as I mentioned, and that's down from 939 in 2013 and 1007 in 2012. Now, we could read into why that is so, but we also like to concentrate on the fact that 784 is still an awful lot of active hate groups to have in the United States. Also on our website, you'll find with the hate map, you can zoom in, and I encourage you to do so, to zoom in on your own state. I just took Ohio since we're here. Nothing against Ohio, but there are 27 active hate groups in this state. We also list out what the groups are, what the groups' names are, what their ideology is, and where you're likely to find them. So just a quick read of Ohio. I found 7 neo-Nazi groups here, 5 racist skinheads, 3 black separatists, all Nation of Islam, 2 anti-LGBT groups, and we just started adding anti-LGBT groups maybe 6 years ago, and a couple of Klan groups. Still, the vast majority of hate groups on the hate map or active hate groups in the United States are white supremacist groups. And the black separatist groups, the Nation of Islam, has always been on the hate group list because they're anti-white, anti-Semitic, and anti-gay. But again, the vast majority are white supremacists. You'll find some Christian identity groups which are not what you would think. They're not that way. They're anti-Semitic and white supremacists is their thing, and thus Christian identity. Now, people often wonder, well, we got the millennials. What's going on? Increased diversity. This is 2015. Why isn't the United States at a better place? Well, it's this tension that we're having right now as the racial demographics change in the country. This survey in 2014, demography is very interesting to me, and I'm from California, where it started to change a couple decades ago. But in the South and in the Midwest, and we're just beginning to talk about it as a country, it's really beginning to change, or people are taking notice of the change, and quite frankly, freaking out because of it. So 2014 marked the first year where white babies weren't in the majority, and that's a really good marker for kind of future trends. If you're not born, then your population goes down. But if you look at population data, like 1970, when we were just kind of experiencing the beginnings of racial diversity in the country, it's 83% white and 17% people of color. And I like to say people love that, just enough. Got some restaurants, got some clothes I can buy, some little, that's interesting. But now, it's a lot different. And this is from 2010 census, 66% white, 34% people of color, and people just can't stand. My God, what happened? It's just too much. And then when we take a closer look at the diversity amongst the people of color population, people they freak. It adds to their freak out. For me, it's really good because it moves us out of this black-white paradigm, and we begin to acknowledge the increasing diversity amongst the people of color populations, and begin to recognize that Asian and Pacific Islanders are the highest growing immigrant group in the country, not Latinos, who we have an irrational fear of. And speaking of irrational fears, black folks are 9 to 12% of the population and are very much echo the white population in becoming stagnant and going down. So once the census began to acknowledge biracial, multiracial people, which I think is the right thing, that pulls primarily from the white population and from the black population. But in any case, black folks won't go over 12%, but I bet we'll continue to be blamed for a lot more. So you look at the pure numbers in terms of net population growth, this is what it is, and this is how I say President Obama won election both times. So you see the white population grew by 15% and people of color by 85%. You can win any national election you want with these demographics. I mean, a progressive. And this is why the GOP freaks out. Now, the second reason why there's an increase in hate groups is this now perception of an economic downturn. It was real, but now we're just in the perception, and we just love talking about how, oh my gosh, how hard it is. When, you know, we're not Greece, you know. And people, oh, my 5 minutes, I gotta go. Okay, so when people perceive themselves to be not making as much money, I guess, as they think they should, or not having as much as they think they should, they start blaming other people. And white supremacist groups have long used this to their advantage, and pointing out that, well, you don't have anything, it's because them. It's their fault. So what we do to try to counter this, in addition to the hate map, is that we publish a magazine and send it out to law enforcement and Homeland Security, because it's our mantra to remind our government officials and law enforcement officials that the real threat, as we see it, is not from ISIS, or not a foreign threat, but the threat of domestic terrorism. Just like, you know, we saw in Charleston with Dylan Roof. So, you know, we send out information on skinheads and on Aryan gangs and how to identify them, and sovereign citizen movement. There's this whole movement that's going on in this country that we just began to talk about post-Charleston. Like, how did Dylan Roof become radicalized? Well, you know, there's this thing called the internet, and you just go on there and you or marginalized and disenfranchised white men in particular, who may be undereducated, low income, feel like they're not stepping into the inheritance that has been true for them, you know, for generation. And my sympathetic side understands that, and they have no one to talk to about it. And so, again, talk to you. Y'all need to start talking about race with your white people. Really, you have to talk to people. Because it's not going to, nothing's going to change. Like, you know, you just have to do it. You have to do it. I mean, you think black people, you know, our parents talk to us about, you know, kind of racial issues, and or you've heard this thing about how black mothers and fathers have to have their talk with their son about how to deal with police. You think that doesn't come any more natural to us than it would to you. It also doesn't come any more natural to me to intentionally create and maintain relationships across groups. Not easier for me. You have to do it. It's not enough to just talk about it or to have something in your mission statement like we want racial diversity. You have to do it, right? And the only way you're going to do it is to actually do it. So, you know, check yourself in terms of what you're doing, what your intentionality is, if your intentionality kind of matches up with your thing. Third reason why the increase is just President Obama. We have another program called Teaching Tolerance that sends out resources, and this is where I want you to know that Southern Poverty Law Center is supportive of the secular movement. We know, because we're in the South, that that atheists, agnostics, skeptics, anybody who's not Jesus is a target for hate. And really, I don't think I'm exaggerating when I say that you're more targeted than kind of a Muslim in the South. I mean, it's just incredible. The Montgomery just started a humanist association. They're just getting off the ground, and I'm giving them space at the Civil Rights Memorial Center because you can't rent space. What? You're what? You want to talk about who? No. I mean, they're completely vilified and marginalized. So we offer space. I've spoken to a number of groups in Alabama. We had a student at Auburn who, in high school, who was tried to start a secular student or association, and they were just like gonna, I don't know, stone him to death. And we had to go help him. And he has a group, and it's a very vibrant group. We offer a number of lessons and activities to teachers so that they can help every student feel safe in the classroom. Also, I should say, in the magazine, we write articles that are supportive of teachers, because not only students who are atheists or agnostic or non-believers, but they're teachers too, and then they don't get any support. So it's across the board. We're refining this kind of prejudice and discrimination. And the Southern Poverty Law Center stands with you. We stand with the most marginalized in society, and certainly qualify. So that's my time, but I'm trying to get to the last slide if I just can, because I wanted to make mention of this. I'm sorry. Marcia mentioned last night the whole conversion therapy, reparative therapy, pray the gay away, and all that. We just had a major success in New Jersey where we sued a group called Jonah, which is a Jewish group. Well, they're mostly Christian groups, but in this case it was a Jewish group. And we went to New Jersey to do it because they had this great fraud law. And so we thought it would be real easy to prove fraud, that no, in fact you can't, and to say so is fraudulent. And so we mounted our case, and we won. And I think it's going to do a lot to shut down these conversion therapy groups across the country. And I'm really, really proud of that. Yeah. So we have not only do we engage in litigation that pertains to racial justice, but also the LGBT Rights Project, the Immigrant Justice Project. And in our LGBT Rights Project, again, referencing Marcia, she talked about transgender women of color being kind of the most targeted group amongst, the Ts, and it's totally true. We represent a client, Ashley Diamond, who's being held in a men's prison in Georgia because, it's Georgia, and they refuse to acknowledge who she is. And they stopped giving her hormone treatment. It's completely awful. So we were able to intervene on her behalf, and a judge ordered Georgia Department of Corrections to give her hormones, but we're continuing to monitor it to make sure that, it's at the right level. So these people, again, I'll just say, things are changing across the country when you look at the country as a whole, but I want you to remember that on issues of social justice, they're not changing as rapidly in the middle, right? In the South and in the middle, there's still a lot of work to do. So I would say that I would not encourage you to rest on your laurels at all, that we've not made the progress that you think we've made. There's so much to do. There's still youth in the South. I mean, we intervene kind of weekly with students in K-12 public schools who can't wear a Pride T-shirt, or a boy who can't wear an earring. It's ridiculous. So there's so much that you need to do with the issues that are important to you, which I'm a queer woman, so I appreciate that you all are supportive of queer issues. I really want you to be supportive of other issues as well. This guy represents the thousands and thousands, almost 10,000 children, primarily children of color, who are being held in adult facilities across this country. It's awful what is happening to children, and I say children because they are being charged as adults for crimes that at one time would have, I don't know, gotten a slap on the wrist or something. But what's happening across the country is these zero-tolerance policies at school are pushing out kids of color and pushing them directly into the juvenile justice system. And so I want you to pay attention to that, because when they get there, I don't know if you heard about, I can't remember his name and I feel really bad about it, this young man who was held at Rikers Island for three years in solitary confinement, primarily in solitary confinement, a child. I mean, he was 16 years old, accused of stealing a backpack or something. He said he didn't do it. He never went to, Thank you. They never brought charges. He never had a case. Was in Rikers Island, an adult prison that's awful, for 3 years. He eventually got out. He didn't want to plead guilty because he didn't do it. but he eventually got out and then he committed suicide. What's happening to children in prisons is awful. So as you work on your issues, remember this quote from the memorial. Oops, already passed it. Until justice rolls down like waters and righteousness like a mighty stream, we can't stop. Thank you.